So I've enjoyed all the worship leaders that the Artist Community Project we've been contracting with for worship for the last few weeks. There's something special about Josh, though. You can tell him I said that. Hey, and if you haven't met Jared in the back, he's here more than anybody. He's been helping us with sound, and he's a special guy, too. I think he probably is kind of the real brains of the operation. Don't take offense, Josh. But I've enjoyed sitting back there with Jared. He knows his stuff, too. I actually asked the band to play that song today because that song raises a real-world tension that I want us to think about as we wrap up this series today. As we're walking alongside the Apostle John, he's recounting his experiences, his eyewitness experiences with Jesus. And one of Jesus's closest friends, we're going to see today, actually echoed kind of a version of that song to Jesus. Where Jesus, yeah, you showed up, but not in time. Where were you? We're going to see that question come out. Where were you when we needed you? And so this morning, we're going to take a deep dive. Try wrestling with one of the most difficult of those inescapable questions of life. And one of the most difficult that we ask at some point, we'll all ask things like, is there a God? Everybody asks that at some point. What happens after I die? Where did I come from? What's the purpose in between those 2 points? What makes wrong right or wrong and right, right? And we all have answers to those questions, even if you don't know how to verbalize them really well. The answers to those questions determine your worldview. You live out of the answers to those questions. And one of the most difficult for many of us to wrestle with is simply this question. And I left my clicker in the back, so you may have to help me. It's why would a good God allow bad things to happen? It's a universal question, and for some of you, this question may have marked the end or maybe even the beginning of faith. For you, in fact, your faith may be like right now, gradually dying and really going through some tough periods because of just things happening around you. Things happening in the world today raise a lot of big questions. Or something happened to somebody you love and you don't know where God was in that and you just can't reconcile. You're finding a real hard time reconciling a good God with the bad things that you see. But the interesting thing about this question is, okay, when we ask it, and let's just be honest here, okay? Isn't it true, at least for me, I think it's true for you too, when we ask this question, aren't we really more focused on all the bad that's happening out there and not so much about all the bad going on in here? So let me ask you just kind of a follow-up question. Have you, okay, and don't raise your hand on this, have you ever done anything bad? Yeah, you can go ahead and laugh at that because you don't have to raise your hand, right? Or really, really don't raise your hand on this. But have you ever really wanted to do something really, 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 really bad? And but you knew if you did it, you'd get caught. Or the only reason you didn't do it is because, okay, you didn't want to get busted. I don't want to end up in jail. But, okay, if you thought you could get away with it, you might have done it anyway. Don't raise your hand. But okay, let's just get real about this, because here's another version of this question, okay? If God is good, why does he make it so difficult for me to be good? Somehow when we start to internalize this question a little bit, we quickly kind of, I want to shift back to no. I'm not talking about the little bad things I do every once in a while, right? Just being human. I'm talking about the big bad things out there. Why doesn't God do something about that? But once you start doing that, okay, listen, you have changed the subject. You have changed the question, and suddenly you're kind of in the world of why did the chicken cross the road, or, Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear, Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair, Fuzzy Wuzzy wasn't fuzzy, was he? Right? You're just kind of messing with your own head there. And we can't cover all these bases today. But I just want to drop this in because it points to where we're going today. This way of thinking leads to this circular thinking where there is no logical answer. And it's also a very emotional question, isn't it? But I think, okay, if John were here, he would tell us, I saw God in a body, right? I saw him coexist with evil in the world and with evil people. And I'm talking about evil that you could barely even imagine. And I saw that the God that I saw didn't prove who he was by just eliminating evil. He did something else. And John would say, okay, that's why I wrote this account. This is why I want to get this out, because I want you to arrive at the same conclusions about Jesus that I did. And the only way to help you arrive at those conclusions is to tell you what I actually saw. And so today we're going to come to this sixth sign that John chose to write us about. And if you were with us last week and been following along, we left Jesus at the end of last week in the vicinity of Jerusalem, and he's going to the temple. And if you remember, that always made his disciples, his closest followers, nervous, because bad things always seemed to go down when Jesus went to the temple, at least to them. And so there, once again, he's there to celebrate Hanukkah this time. But he gets into a conversation with the temple leaders, and they ask him this question they've been dying to ask him all along. They just finally come out and say, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. And so Jesus replies. He says, I already told you, and you don't believe me. The proof is in the work I do in my Father's name. It's like it's all around you. It's right in front of you. In other words, okay, I didn't just tell you. I've shown you, and you don't want to see it. I've given you evidence, you just don't embrace it, right? And they wouldn't embrace it because, like we said last week, and maybe just like some of us, they were willfully blind. Like they would not see what could be seen. Their minds were already made up about the matter, so they're not going there. And so at this point, Jesus really elevates things to the point that nobody's going to have any doubt when he's left with this sign about who he claimed to be. And this sign was so indisputable that it forces the hand of those who were willfully blind. And just could not embrace or accept the fact that Jesus was who he claimed to be. All right? And here's what happened. So a man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. Now, if you look at this on a map, Bethany's like a day and a half travel away from Jerusalem if you were walking. So these two sisters, they send Jesus a message telling him, Lord, your dear friend is sick. And I just imagine, okay, being so close to Jesus, you didn't have to even mention the name. Just your dear friend, and Jesus knew exactly who you're talking about. That's how close they were. But if you grew up in church, okay, you've probably heard this story. You remember the flannel graph and all of that, right? It's such an unusual story to start out with. Because it says when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. Okay, but the fact was, by the time this messenger had actually gotten to Jesus and the disciples, Lazarus was already dead. But Jesus continues, and if you were with us last week, this is going to sound familiar. He said, no, this was for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. To which, okay, if you didn't know this story, okay, if you were hearing this for the very first time, you would probably want to push back and say, wait. Like sickness, suffering for the glory of God, that's just sadistic. Like what that, and John would say, okay, yeah, I know it sounds that way, but we're just getting started. Because Jesus, he's now delved into a whole new category. This issue of why bad things happen in nature. I didn't bring this on myself. I didn't do anything bad. So why are there natural disasters? Why are there so many cancers? Why are there pandemics, right? And how could we possibly believe that God is good when the world seems to be our enemy sometimes? I mean, why wouldn't God do something about all this COVID mess and just make life easier instead of making it so difficult? Well, in this story, okay, Jesus, for his disciples, for many of us, for you, creates this brand new category, sickness for the glory of God. Now, and again, that's so uncomfortable, isn't it? And you expect me to do some kind of spin on this, but I'm not going to have to. And John seems to know this tension, so he jumps into the story and he kind of makes an editorial comment, so we won't just close the book and say, well, that's just crazy. That's ridiculous. He says, so although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and why does he have to tell us that? Because it kind of looks like Jesus doesn't. It kind of looks like Jesus is just brushing him off. This is your dear friend, right? And sometimes in your life, in the moment, it doesn't seem like maybe God cares for you too much either. So he's telling us, okay, don't check out too soon. Not here, not in the story, not in your own life, right? Jesus actually loves these people. Don't check out too soon. God actually loves you too. But John tells us when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. He wasn't just tied up. He wasn't trying to get there or not. I mean, this was a decision. He made the choice. When he found out, he stayed, which is crazy to the people around him because Jesus had the potential, he had the power to heal total strangers just by talking about it, right? Why would he not get up and rush off to his dear friend Lazarus? And the answer was he was up to something. He was staging a sign with a purpose in mind. So 2 days goes by. The messenger goes back to Bethany. Jesus and the guys are just hanging out. I mean, they're doing whatever they're doing. And finally, he said to his disciples, now let's go back to Judea. Now immediately his guys are perplexed because the last time they were in this area, it didn't go well. In fact, the last time they were in this area, when they were at the temple during the conversation I mentioned earlier, they had actually picked up stones to kill Jesus. And the problem, I mean, you think about it, the problem with being someone that's close to Jesus all the time and might be stoned is that people aren't always accurate, right? And that's not just me being snarky. That sounds fun, but they actually tipped their hats to this fear in the next verse. Look at this. His disciples objected. Rabbi, only a few days ago, the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again? And like the real question is, and you want us to go with you, right? And then Jesus does his Jesus thing where he seemingly kind of changes the subject on them. And these were the moments, okay, when we look at these, when we read these were the times that they were so confused, and we get so confused. And oftentimes, you know, this is really the brilliance, though. This is Jesus bringing heaven to earth in a real world crisis situation, right? Jesus tells them there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there's danger of stumbling because they have no light. And they're like, all right, I mean, cool. Thanks for that reminder. It's not really new information. Like, what does that have to do with us going back to Bethany and seeing Lazarus again? And as this eyewitness account unfolds, the point of what Jesus says here starts to become really clear. In fact, Jesus is basically saying to his disciples here, fellas, you need to follow closely to the light of this world while the light of the world is in the world. Because, you know, if you remember, he said a similar thing last week when we talked about him healing the blind man, remember? And he said, you guys, right now, you have a very unique opportunity to be up and close to something that's really, really special while the light of the world is in the world, because the light of the world is leaving the world, and when that happens, it's going to get really, really dark. And he was saying, you're never going to see more clearly than you see right now, so I need you to pay attention. I need you to write this down, right? He's telling them, if you stay where you are, out of fear, you're going to miss the opportunity of a lifetime. And I'm not sure what that might mean for you, okay? But Jesus is basically saying this. If you refuse to follow the light while you have the light, while you see the light, you're going to just stumble around in the darkness, which is kind of a duh thing, but then why do we do it? You'll stumble around in a world that has no meaning. You'll stumble around in a world that seems to have no purpose to look forward to. Right? You'll stumble around in darkness trying to make sense out of the world that really doesn't make sense, out of a God who doesn't really make sense. You'll stumble around in darkness trying to make sense out of a God maybe you're not even sure you believe in. It's the kind of existence that this is where that famed atheist Richard Dawkins, I think he actually got it right. He said, you take God out of the picture, it's a bottom where there is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, he called it. Yeah, I would agree. And Jesus was saying to his disciples, and Jesus says to us, you need to follow me because I'm the light. I'm the light of the world who came into the world to bring light to your world. And apart from the author of life, yeah, all of this maybe even will seem meaningless. And you'll stumble around in darkness trying to piece together things that you'll never piece together. So he's like, after all of this, we're going back. You want to go? And then he went on to tell them more plainly. He says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up. All right, so who's in, guys, right? Who wants to go with me? Well, they didn't want to go. And so they kind of start giving Jesus some medical advice. And it's not real clear that they get it. It's kind of funny to me. I mean, have you ever given medical advice to God, like when you're praying or something? Like just, God, if I were you, maybe, this is how I'd do it. You let God know what the doctors could do. And God's just kind of like, okay, I got this. So they begin to go there just kind of like we might do. The disciples said, Lord, if he's sleeping, he'll soon get better. Right on. I mean, in other words, we don't want to go. Apparently, we don't even have to go, right? Well, thank you for that, Andrew. I hadn't thought of that. We'll just kind of stay here, make s'mores, and just let him get better on his own, right? Cool. But John tells us, because he's writing this after the fact, right? He's remembering this as an old man. Okay, they thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping. They took Jesus very, very literally here. But Jesus meant Lazarus had died, so he tells them plainly, fellas, dudes, Lazarus is dead. But now, okay, wait. Just 2 days ago, you told us this sickness would not end in death, and now Lazarus is dead. And what comes next, okay, in the story, it really does seem heartless. It seems so horrible for Mary and Martha and for Lazarus. But Jesus continues and he says, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you'll really believe. I'm glad I wasn't there. So come, let's go see him. I mean, I'm going to put this in context. This is horrible. This is so harsh. Nobody would put these words in the mouth of Jesus if he didn't really say it. It's not flattering. I'm glad I wasn't there to keep my friend from going through all this agony and dying. I'm glad I wasn't there to have to put his sisters to watch him die. I'm glad I wasn't. Who would put those words in the mouth of Jesus? I'm glad I wasn't there for your sake and for my sake. For your sake, for your sake. I'm glad I wasn't there. And for the sake of probably every parent that's had to bury a child. For the sake of every husband who's ever had to bury a wife. For every child who's ever had to bury a parent way too early. I'm glad I wasn't there. For the sake of every friend who's buried a friend. For all of us, Jesus says, so that on the other side of this, I'm actually creating a new category. I'm glad I wasn't there. This is new to them. For many of us, this is kind of a strange new way of thinking. Because this was brand new to the world. Again, the light of the world had come into the world to shine light on things that were dark. And mankind has wrestled with it for 1,000 years. How do I reconcile the idea of a good God with everything I see around me? We're still asking that question. And Jesus uses this as a perfect opportunity to show us. Okay, and then to me, at least, this is one of the funniest parts of the entire New Testament. Because they still don't want to go. They don't want to be there, right? Verse 16, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, and I hear this kind of in an Eeyore voice, right? Well, let's go to and die with Jesus, right? It's just dramatic much, Thomas. Lazarus is dead. Jesus is going to die. So let's just all go die together, right? So anyway, meanwhile, back in Bethany, where the conversation is more like, where is Jesus? Right? We sent this message a long time ago. I mean, Jesus didn't get here in time to even save Lazarus. We're going to wait 2 or 3 days because that's kind of what they did back then when they had a funeral. But finally, the 3rd day's coming to an end. And they've got to put him in the tomb. And Jesus misses the funeral. Jesus misses the entombment. And John says, okay, I was there. And at this point in the moment, it was so embarrassing. Right? We really didn't want to go. We weren't sure if it was fear for the most part or just the embarrassment of having to face Mary and Martha, And he tells us, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days now. So watch this. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she didn't even wait for Jesus to get there. She went out to meet him. And don't you bet she did, with her hand on her hip and her finger wagging, right? And this is just so honest. This is just so raw. And if you've ever prayed anything, something like this, I mean, it's so appropriate. You get this. You get what she's feeling. Because people who are close to Jesus, it's refreshing to me. Sometimes they express in moments like this what we feel. Here's what Martha said to Jesus. Lord, if you would have been here, where were you? If you would have been here, my brother would not have died. You could have done something about this, right? This is partially your fault. God, you could have, but you didn't. I mean, isn't it at least good to know that when something doesn't go your way, it doesn't automatically mean something's wrong with your faith? But in this case, Jesus actually uses a bad thing as a sign for your sake, for my sake. But she's trying to cling to what little faith she might still have. Jesus, I'm so conflicted. Jesus, I'm so upset with you. But I still have a shred of faith in you. Look at what she says. Even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And so I kind of see Jesus smile here a little bit. He tells us, your brother will rise again. Well, now, okay, she just assumes Jesus is going into preacher mode here, right? Like maybe when somebody walks up to you, you've been going through a bad time, and they got just the right verse for you, right? Or this time of crisis, you're like, you know what? Later. That's not what I need right now, right? Hey, you need to listen to this sermon. Okay, I don't want a sermon. Somebody says, well, the Bible teaches this. Hey, I'm in crisis mode. Like right now, I get all of that, and I know that's true. I've lost somebody though I love, and I don't want a Bible. I don't want a sermon. I don't want theology. I just want somebody to care. And so she thinks Jesus is maybe just trying to make her feel better. Yeah, Martha says, he'll rise at the last day. Just like everybody else, right? I know. Okay, I've been to synagogue. I was in Sunday school, right? But I wanted you to get here. I thought you would be here. So we didn't have to wait for the last day. I wanted more days now. And what comes next is so breathtaking we miss it because we're not there, okay? Because few of us could probably have ever really felt the emotion or the frustration perhaps that Mary and Martha felt in this moment. Jesus tells her, I am the resurrection and the life. I'm the living embodiment, he's saying, of everything you have ever hoped for. It's right here in me. Anyone who believes in me, he says, will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. And lives in me and believes in me, what he's talking about is more than just like head knowledge of this thing, but you actually trust me enough to follow me and want to be like me and be with me, trusting in me. Okay, but I get it. There's no way in this moment she could have taken all of this in. There's no way that most of us can take all of this in the moment. Just as he said Lazarus wouldn't die, but he died, Jesus is saying, okay, you'll die, but you won't. Because Jesus really couldn't have been any more clear in this moment. What he's really saying is death is not the end. Death is a door. Death is a passageway. Death is a simple transition. It's a destination. This is not all there is. And then he looks at her, and I think he sees the confusion, and he sees this point where religion sometimes clashes with the real world, and he sees a person, they have this relationship, right? I mean, he's eating in their home. And he looks at her, and he asks, do you believe this, Martha? And this was so hard for her to believe because what's in front of her right now, right? And let's be honest, it's hard for you and me to believe this sometimes. I mean, we know. Mary felt the same way, though, and so she musters up as much faith as she can find in this moment. Yes, Lord. Yes, I have always believed you're the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who's come from heaven into this world, the one who's come into the world from God. Like, I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on right now. I don't get it at all. I don't know how all this is going to come together, and I don't know why you were late. But yeah, I've seen way too much out of you. I've been through too much with you, and I don't understand everything, but I realize I don't have to understand everything to believe something. So I believe in you, but that's really all I know in this moment. And so Martha goes back to her house, and she tells Mary that Jesus is out on the edge of town. Mary goes out and meets with Jesus. They kind of have a similar conversation if you read through this, and it's a very human moment. And John gives us this little detail, okay? He tells us Jesus was deeply moved at this point with emotion. He even says Jesus was troubled, even though he knew what was about to happen. But he asked them, where did you put him? And so they told him, Lord, come and see. And so they go, this extraordinary moment where Jesus arrives outside of the tomb, knowing he knows what he's about to do, and yet he pauses, okay, and he enters into this very human side of the emotion of the moment. I mean, this is divine empathy. And Peter was there, and perhaps this is why Peter wrote this later on in one of his letters when he said, it's okay. It's okay to give your cares and your worries and your concerns to God. Why? Because God cares for you. Well, okay, how do you know that, Peter? Because I was there and I saw it. I saw it in the moment. That day standing outside the tomb, not knowing what was going to happen, but seeing what he ultimately did, I'm just telling you, in that moment, Jesus entered into the pain, he entered into the tears and the fear and all that human emotion right there in that moment, right? And I saw it, Peter would tell us. I saw him not just rush into a resolution and a quick fix, but he entered into it. Just so you can cast your cares on him. And that's why what John records for us next, it's not just a trivial detail. And I'm glad whoever it was that organized our New Testament into like chapters and verses. It wasn't written that way originally, right? They made it easy for us to find our way through. But when whoever got to this very next little small statement, they gave this statement its own verse number just to try to make it stand out. Although Jesus knew what amazing thing was about to happen, he's about to blow their mind, he stops in this moment, and John tells us, then Jesus wept. And that word wept, it wasn't just a little sniffle and a tear. I mean, it was like all-out bawling. Jesus was broken in this moment. And it was so dramatic that he tells us the people who were standing nearby said, see how much he loved him. It was obvious. But not everybody. Some said, yeah, but, okay, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying, right? They're still asking that honor question. Where was he? He could have, but he didn't. I mean, this is where I start to see myself again. Why didn't he do something if he could have? Why did he make me go through all of that? Why doesn't he do something now? If he could have, he would have, but since he didn't, maybe he just doesn't care. But as it turns out, he could have. He just didn't. He chose instead. And if you haven't been paying attention, all right, please don't miss this part. This is the brilliance of Jesus in a very painful moment here. Jesus condenses like the entire human experience down to just a few hours in one afternoon so future generations like us could really get the sense of hope from this, all right? It says Jesus was still angry. He was troubled as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across the entrance. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. And you can just imagine, okay, the mourners that were there, they just fell silent. Mary and Martha probably gasped. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. And just being real, she says, the smell will be terrible. The King James actually says, Lord, he stinketh. It's a real thing in there. But Jesus responded, didn't I tell you? How many times does Jesus say this? Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? And can I just pause and say, okay, this is a really huge question for you and me too. Did I not tell you? Have you not been listening? Did I not demonstrate for you? Okay, if you just believe, if you will just trust me, if you will trust in me, you will see the glory of God. So they roll a stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. And then he says something you should really consider. It says he prayed, you always hear me. But I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here so that they would believe that you sent me. Now that's cool because it's not just for the sake of those on that day. Jesus knew that this was for future generations too. It's for the sake of you and me that he said this out loud so they get it, right? The most important question, the most important question for you to wrestle with is not the question of good and evil. It's a good question. It's not the most important question. It's not even the question of God and evil. That's a good question too. But the most important question for any of us to really wrestle with, I believe, is this question of who is Jesus. It's pivotal. Because if Jesus is who he claimed to be, if he was all of those things, then all of these things that we wrestle with now get reconciled and explained in Jesus. And he says, you just got to trust me. So is he. So this is the point in the story where everybody took a step back. Because Jesus shouts out, Lazarus, come out. And John's, okay, remember, he's dictating this as an old man. He's remembering this moment, and he thinks to himself, we would have never believed what we saw next. Right? I was there. I saw it. The dead man came out, and his hands and feet were bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. I mean, can you just imagine this thing coming out of the tomb? I mean, literally, Jesus told him, unwrap him, let him go. And everybody picks up their jaws at this moment and probably needed some smelling salts, a few of them, right? Because Lazarus is alive. And then John reiterates the point of his whole gospel. Many people who were there with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. I bet they did, don't you? Of course. And this is John's message, right? He says, look, I don't want you to simply believe in Jesus because of belief. I'm not just trying to get you to have faith in faith, right? I'm not trying to muster up some kind of manipulated kind of thing of belief. I'm not asking you to believe in Jesus just because of belief. I want you to know what I saw. Because listen, if you saw what I saw, and if you trust me as someone who's giving an eyewitness testimony and it's true, then perhaps you're going to arrive at the same conclusion about Jesus that I did, and it'll change your life the way it changed my life. Not just simply what Jesus did, but about who he was. I mean, okay, like skeptics, if you're watching, you're here today, let me talk to you for just a second, because I can be a real skeptic too. Like I'm a pragmatic. I like logic, maybe too much sometimes. And maybe you don't really believe Jesus was anything special. Said some good things, good teacher, all of that. But even educated skeptics agree that, okay, Christianity would not have grown as it has in our world. It wouldn't have even grown to the numbers it had grown in just the 2nd and 3rd centuries if there had not been an explosion of followers right off the bat, very early on toward the end of Jesus' life on this earth. And why did so many people, okay, this wasn't a day of internet and Snapchat and all that stuff. Word got out, though. Why were so many people drawn to Jesus ultimately as their Savior and claiming that they believed in him as the Messiah so quickly? Because they had faith? Because they were manipulated into some kind of belief? No. Because of what they saw. Because of what happened. Something happened. Which leads us to John's little formula, okay? And if you don't take anything away from the Gospel of John in this series, I want you to just kind of think about this later on. It's simply this, that seeing leads to believing, and believing leads to trusting. I saw it, I believed it, but it didn't end there. I want you to do something with it, trusting. And John's agenda isn't just simply that you'll know the stories, right? John's agenda isn't simply that you'll know what he saw, and it's not simply that you would just believe that it happened. It would be that you would ultimately place your personal faith, your trust in this man, in Jesus, and who he claimed to be because of what he did on planet Earth for you. The light had come on. This was such indisputable evidence when they saw him come out of the tomb. It turns out those who were willfully blind decided they finally had to step in and do something, okay? So much so they call a meeting back in Jerusalem. And they agree that, okay, there's no getting around this. This wasn't done like out in the way corners of the empire somewhere or in the corners of the nation. This was done publicly. It was done in a local community, and it was people gathering for a funeral of a famous person. And now, okay, there's no getting around it. Jesus had done something extraordinary, and so his enemies gather and decide, okay, this has got to end. This is too big a threat, and it's got to end now. So they decide they're going to have Jesus arrested and executed. And it even tells us they were going to get Lazarus executed too, like he's already died once. They're going to kill him again. But here's what they said in their meeting. Somebody later leaked this to John. They said, listen, watch this. If we allow him to go on like this, everybody's going to believe in him before it's over. They saw it. They saw it. But they were willfully blind, but they saw it. As if they let him do anything, right? Jesus himself said, nobody takes my life from me. I'll lay it down willingly. Right? All authority is in me. All of the sacrifice I made on purpose, with a purpose, with you in mind. Okay, but in their meeting, as they're trying to grapple with this undeniable reality, what just happened just outside of Jerusalem, okay, they had no idea that, that 2,000 years later, over a third of the world's population believes in Jesus. If we let him go on like this, soon everybody will believe in him. I mean, there's so much for us to lose, they felt. They had no idea what was to gain. Because God had come in the flesh to live right alongside evil. And the light was so bright. And for some, they were attracted. For others, they were repulsed. But later, John would say it this way. Remember, he said that God so loved this evil world. God so loved the evil people in this world that he sent his perfect son, the light of the world, so that by placing our faith and trust to follow him, we would not be lost to God. And we would not wander aimlessly in this world. But that we could have the very life Jesus came to promise to give us. And John would go on to tell us about the events leading up to Passover week and the arrest and the crucifixion, the resurrection, and everything that he saw at the end of Jesus' ministry. And you should take time. If you've never really read through the Gospel of John, I'd encourage you to. You can do it in one sitting. It's fascinating. And John would also say, okay, listen, I'm nobody special. I'm just an eyewitness. And why God allowed me to live in these days when the light of the world was so bright, I don't know. But I know you got to hear my story. You got to see what I saw. You got to hear what I heard. Because if you heard what I heard and saw what I saw, you would draw hopefully the same conclusion I drew about Jesus, that he was in fact God in a body. He in fact did something amazing. And he did it so that your life could be amazing too. For God's purposes, for all mankind. And listen to me, okay? If you've ever found, or maybe even right now, you find yourself on the verge of losing faith because of some difficulty in your life, and I've gone through some crisis of faith, and maybe that's where you are, I just want to say to you, okay, listen, don't give up. Embrace it. Lean into that tension, but don't give up. Don't give up. You're not the first person to be there, and you won't be the last. And the light of the world came into the world with you in mind, not just to tell you about it, but to model the life that you could live and point you to the life that you were meant to live in him. So what's your next step? Maybe it's just to come back. Maybe it's just to continue wrestling with this. Maybe it's to ask some questions. Maybe it's to get with someone and go a little bit deeper with this. Maybe today is the day you take that step, and we would love to know about that. That's not a step we want you to take alone. But whatever it is, John wrote this, and it's compelling us to do something with it. So would you just pray with me? Let me pray for you. Father, I thank you again for preserving these stories for us to read. But God, not just so that we could get history, not just so that we could even be inspired, but God, so that we could do something with it and about it. So God, give us wisdom today to know what to do with what we've heard, with what we've seen through the eyes of John, who walked alongside you. God, help that to change our perspective of maybe what we're facing right now. God, give us a sense of hope, maybe even a certainty in the doubt. But God, help us to be willing to at least take a step forward, to take off the blinders, God, and at least be willing to see what could be seen. And because of that, God, I trust that you're going to do something amazing on the other side of this, in and through all of us. And so I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so with that,